Almost 9 months ago, we looked at this data when talking about employee recognition. The report from the Society for Human Resource Management, published in 2015, found that highly engaged employees had almost universally been praised at work, with low engaged employees responding the opposite. And similarly, that high engaged employees almost universally said that their manager cares about them, with the opposite being reported by low engaged employees. That was a national study that essentially says there is a link between employee recognition and manager investment and employee engagement. We now have data specific to University Medical Center that speaks to this national study and what we have always suspected. UMC rolled out nDorse hospital-wide in early July of 2017 as a way to foster a culture of recognition and to help develop a culture of excellence throughout the hospital. In just under 300 days, the following measurable data has been collected. There have been 14,406 endorsements sent, with over 2,000 employees that could average out to about 7 independent pieces of recognition since the launch of nDorse. However, that's the law of averages. In actuality, there are some standout people. Like Chanel Johnson in Patient Access, who has received 70 endorsements, Mason Green in MedSurg ICU, who has received 60 endorsements, and Lauren Freitag in the ED, who has received 52 endorsements, and so many others. We also had several employees recognized as compassionate caregivers during Kindness Week, like Loris Greathouse, who was recognized for compassion in nDorse by Toya Smith. She won 2 PJ's gift cards and promptly gave one to her coworker in the OR because she not only espouses the core value of compassion, but also teamwork. Furthermore, there are 1,230 users within nDorse at UMC, and around 80% of all employees have received at least one endorsement. That's a lot of recognition in just around 9 months. But let's get to the meat of it. Is this impacting employee engagement? We pulled data from the engagement surveys, which were proctored in October of 2017, and we cross-referenced that with data that we pulled from nDorse during its first 90 days of use. We only used data from nDorse from July of 2017 until October of 2017 when the engagement surveys closed. We didn't pull any data after the engagement survey window was closed. The data collected looks at 52 departments and 2,160 employees spread across the entire hospital. First, we looked at the impact nDorse utilization had on engagement scores. To measure this, we defined utilization as one person receiving one endorsement. So, for example, in a department that has 10 employees, if 8 of those employees received an endorsement, that department would have a utilization rate of 80%. We compared that with the overall question on the engagement survey, which is stated as follows. Where 0 is the worst possible place to work, and 10 is the best possible place to work, how would you rate this organization as a place to work, as scored by each department? So, for instance, if you take a department like Quality and Patient Safety, the data from nDorse said that that department had a utilization rate of 87%. We compared that to the data we pulled from the NRC engagement survey, which said that that department increased 43.4 points on the rating as a place to work question from 2016 to 2017. We pulled those 2 pieces of data for each of the 52 departments across the hospital to see if there was a correlation between nDorse utilization and growth in the rating as a place to work question on the NRC engagement survey. And when we examined this data, looking at the average growth in scores on the y-axis and the nDorse utilization on the x-axis, here's what we found. Departments that had utilization under 50%, that means that less than 50% of their employees had been endorsed, grew on average 2.34 points. Departments that had utilization between 50 and 75% grew on average 8.74 points. But then we saw departments with utilization between 75 and 100% only grow 5.9 points. That was not the correlation we were expecting. However, what we saw was that in this top grouping of 75 to 100% utilization, we found that over 60% of the departments fell in that category. In the middle category, we saw that 30% of the departments fell in this one. And then in the bottom category, well, you can do the math. The great problem that we had was that utilization across the hospital was too high. Too many people had logged in just one time and endorsed all of their employees just one time, which skewed the data. So we had to think, what's another way that we can compare this data? We went off the premise that using nDorse one time wasn't enough. So instead, what if we looked at departments that had a high number of endorsements to see if there was a correlation between high utilization of nDorse, the high number of average endorsements that each employee received, and the overall rating as a place to work question? So similar to the last graph, we're looking at the overall rating as a place to work on the y-axis. Down here on the x-axis, we're comparing it to the average number of endorsements per person. We'll call this first grouping the one endorsement group. This group represents 17 departments, in which each employee in these 17 departments received about one endorsement. The 17 departments grew on average 4.45 points on the rating as a place to work question. The second group we'll call the two endorsement group. This group also represents around 17 departments, and on average, employees within these departments received 2 endorsements. This grouping grew on average 6.55 points. And then our final grouping also represents around 17 departments. On average, these employees received 3 or more endorsements, and they grew 7.21 points on the rating as a place to work question. And when we put all of this data from the 52 departments into a linear regression calculator, we found that there was a 0.8 correlation between the number of endorsements that a person received and the growth in the rating as a place to work. Essentially saying that departments in which employees received more endorsements saw their overall rating as a place to work score increase more. But first, a quick word of caution. We're basing all of this data off of just 1 year, and while we're incredibly optimistic and hopeful about what this data is showing us, we have to remember that correlation does not imply causation, as there are so many things going into the incredible work happening here every single day. And remember that at the root of this, nDorse is just a tool that any leader or any employee can use, much like rounding, or department meetings, or any one-to-one coaching. These are all tools that can go into your toolbox, which have a huge impact on employee engagement. However, what we really wanted to see was, does it actually have an impact on employee engagement when an employee's direct manager recognizes that employee? Using the data that we pulled from nDorse, and once again the NRC Health Survey, we were able to see that correlation as well. We looked at 3 different groupings this time. The first, low manager utilization of 0 to 7%. And what that means is a direct manager only recognized between 0 and 7% of their direct reports in nDorse. The second grouping was the medium manager utilization. That manager only recognized between 8 and 24% of their direct reports. And finally, we have the high manager utilization. This is a manager who recognized 25% or more of their direct reports in nDorse. We then compared that data to 3 different buckets. The first being overall rating as a place to work, exactly like the previous 2 pieces of data. We then looked at manager investment as a key driver within NRC Health. And then finally, we looked at peer-to-peer relationships as a key driver within NRC Health. Using the rating as a place to work data from the NRC Health Survey, we compared that to 3 new groupings. Our first grouping, low manager endorsements, represents departments in which less than 7% of employees were recognized by their direct manager. In this grouping, we found that the scores grew 3.53 points. Our second grouping, medium manager endorsements, represents departments in which less than 24% of their employees were recognized. In these departments, we saw on average growth of 4.31 points. And then in our high manager endorsements grouping, where over 24% of employees had been recognized by their direct manager, on average, these departments saw growth of 7.04 points. That's pretty significant growth. Drilling down deeper into these results, using the same groupings as before, we'll see if manager recognition within nDorse had an impact on manager investment overall. The data that makes up the manager investment grouping within NRC Health Engagement Survey is really a compilation of 3 questions. The first question is, do I benefit from a one-on-one relationship with the person I report to? The second, does the person I report to create opportunities for my professional growth? And finally, do I have all of the tools to do my job effectively? And when looking at the manager investment growth from 2016 to 2017, here's what we found. In the grouping of low manager endorsements, they grew on average 0.69 points year over year. The medium manager endorsements group grew on average 1.94 points year over year. And the high manager endorsements group grew on average 7.32 points year over year. But then we wanted to look at one more thing using those same groupings as before. What impact does this have on peer-to-peer relationships? This is going off of the assumption that if a manager recognizes their employees, it's going to trickle down into building a positive culture in that department. The peer-to-peer relationship grouping in NRC Engagement Survey looks at 4 different questions. Do I have friendships with my work colleagues outside of the work environment? Do I have great relationships with others who I work with? Do I look for opportunities to support others I work with? And do the people I work with treat each other with respect? And here is what we found looking at the year-over-year growth of the peer-to-peer relationships grouping. In our low manager endorsements group, we actually found that peer-to-peer relationship scores decreased 1.01 points year over year. In our medium manager endorsements grouping, we found that scores on average decreased 0.17 points on the peer-to-peer relationship score. But in departments that had a high manager endorsement of direct reports, we saw peer-to-peer relationship scores grow on average 4.76 points from 2016 to 2017. In short, we saw an increase in engagement scores, almost across the board, which is fantastic. However, we never had unique data to UMC to prove a hypothesis from the beginning of this presentation, that more recognition equals higher employee engagement. Now, we do have that data, and it shows us that recognizing once is not enough. Rather, consistent recognition built as a habit that is genuine and authentic impacted employee engagement scores, manager investment scores, and peer-to-peer relationship scores in the NRC Health Engagement Survey in 2017. So, big takeaway here, catch your team doing something right and recognize them for it. And thank you for your continued effort of building a culture of recognition at UMC.